The carefully cooked meal, the precision of the poisoning, the severed phone line. He wasn't cheating. He was clearing the board. He wasn't just cheating, I said, standing slowly. He was erasing us. Tessa flinched but said nothing. The wall intercom crackled to life, breaking the silence. It was Detective Moore's voice. Cool, calm, businesslike. Ms. Hartley, suspect located. Charleston International Airport. Moving in now. The detective's voice crackled through the radio. Suspect located. Charleston International Airport. Moving in. The courtroom was colder than the hospital, but this time I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to end it. The fluorescent lights didn't flicker. The benches didn't creak. But everything in that room felt unnaturally still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat upright in the witness chair, spine stiff, palms resting flat against my thighs. My blouse was neatly pressed, my hair pinned back. I dressed like it was just another day at work, like this was procedure, not a reckoning. Dylan sat 10 feet from me, separated by bulletproof glass and 2 bailiffs. His orange jumpsuit was rumpled and his hands were cuffed. He looked smaller than I remembered. Eyes sunken, beard uneven. He hadn't shaved properly in weeks. I couldn't see the man I married anymore, just the outline of someone who once wore his skin. The prosecutor nodded to me gently. Ready when you are, Mrs. Hartley. I didn't look at Dylan, not once. I was poisoned on November 12th, I said, my voice even. My daughter Sophie was poisoned too. The substance was benzodiazepine, crushed and mixed into mashed potatoes my husband prepared for dinner. Gasps rippled faintly through the courtroom, but I didn't pause. We did not ingest it accidentally. This was premeditated. My husband cooked the meal, served it with full knowledge of what it contained, and watched us eat it. He never called for help. He stood at the sink washing dishes while we lost consciousness. I continued, recounting every moment, each scene not with drama, but with precision. The timeline, the taste, the silence, the whisper. They'll both be gone soon. I was a nurse for over a decade. I know how poison works, and I know what planning looks like. The defense didn't interrupt. Tessa sat behind me in the gallery, holding Sophie's hand. They both wore muted colors, somber. Sophie's feet dangled from the bench. Her hands clutched around the edges of a stuffed bear she hadn't let go of since that night. The trial moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The fake passport, the new identity, the prenup, the storage unit filled with suitcases and burner phones, the photos of Dylan and Lila Spencer, smiling over champagne flutes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, the foreman said. Life without parole. Dylan didn't react. He didn't flinch. He just stared at me, as though waiting for me to return the gaze. I didn't. Outside the courthouse, the wind had turned sharper. Fall was bleeding into winter. Sophie clung to my coat as we stepped down the stone stairs. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just exhaled. Long, deep, final. 3 weeks later, we moved into a small house across town. Not fancy, but bright. Lots of windows. Hardwood floors. No memories carved into the walls. One Saturday morning, I brewed coffee in the kitchen. The smell filled the air. Nutty, warm. Tessa read the news on her tablet, legs curled under her on the couch. Sophie sat by the bay window, flipping through a book, the light haloing her hair like gold. The front door was locked. I checked it twice now, just to be sure. The kettle whistled. I poured the coffee slowly, watching the steam rise. And I whispered to myself, "You didn't destroy us. You made us stronger. And if he ever wonders what became of us, we lived." The man who once called himself her protector sat behind bars, stripped of every illusion he'd tried to craft. What began as quiet suspicion ended in a courtroom where truth finally had a voice. And that voice did not tremble. Justice was not handed to her. It was fought for, inch by inch, through fear, silence, and fire. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. Sometimes, survival is not just breathing, but choosing to speak, to stand, to remember. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Clara kept her posture straight, chin lifted just enough to seem composed, not defensive. The dining room, with its vaulted ceilings and heavy velvet curtains, seemed to echo with every clink of crystal. Conversation swirled around her, but none landed, not on her. The candlelight flickered over portraits of ancestors she barely remembered, all solemn-eyed in oil and gold frames. The scent of rosemary lamb hung in the air, but she barely touched her plate. Grayson was recounting his latest strategic pivot at his startup, animated hands slicing the air like a conductor. Their mother, Margot, responded with that polished mid-sentence smile she reserved for donors and investors. "That's brilliant, darling. Just brilliant." Douglas, their father, chuckled like it was a stockholders' meeting. "You're positioning yourself at the perfect time. Disruption is everything." Clara sipped her wine. It was dry, expensive, and just bitter enough to match the moment. She glanced to her right, where Rachel sat silently, an invited guest, but more like a shadow, unacknowledged except for a brief nod when she arrived. Rachel's hand was resting under the table, knuckles white from clutching her napkin. The desserts had just been cleared when Clara spoke. "I'd like to say something." Margot blinked, then smiled, tight and expectant. "Of course, dear." Clara took a steady breath. "Nathan and I have set a date. March 15th. A pause, the kind that doesn't descend gently, but crashes, sudden and heavy. Grayson spoke first, laughing. "Wait, March 15th? That's my birthday weekend, you know that." Margot's smile faltered, but returned with icy grace. "That's a bit close, isn't it?" Douglas leaned forward, lacing his fingers like he did before a business offer. "Grayson's planning something quite significant this year, turning 30, a full gala at the Belmont." "I didn't know," Clara said calmly, "but the date works for us. It's after the museum's exhibit, before Nathan travels again." Margot waved a hand as if brushing away a bad draft. "Still, family should come first. Perhaps a small shift, a week earlier, later?" Clara smiled, tight, polite. "We've already sent out save the dates." Grayson chuckled, incredulous. "You really think people will show up to some budget wedding over a Belmont gala?" Clara looked at him, truly looked. There was no malice in his eyes, just casual entitlement, the kind cultivated when no one ever told you no. "You may be surprised," she said softly. Margot placed her glass down, a little too quickly. "Darling, no one's saying you can't have your moment. Just be flexible." Douglas exhaled slowly, like he was tired of walking on eggshells. "Let's be practical. The family can't split. We'll attend Grayson's event. It's what's best for everyone." Rachel shifted slightly in her seat. Clara caught it in the corner of her eye, a flicker of rage quickly hidden. Douglas turned his gaze to Clara. "If we have to choose between a daughter's wedding and a son's milestone, we choose the one who matters." The room was still. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to wait. Clara stood. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. "Well then, consider this my RSVP. With regrets." By mid-January, every RSVP had arrived, except for the ones that mattered most. The Charleston air that evening was crisp but not biting, wrapping the rooftop in a gentle hush, only interrupted by the occasional hum of traffic far below. Clara adjusted the silk ribbon on another envelope and placed it gently on the growing stack between her and Rachel. They sat beneath strung lanterns that swayed with the wind, casting soft circles of gold across their faces, the invitation cards, and 2 glasses of untouched white wine. "You really did all this by hand," Rachel murmured, running her fingers over the thick matte cardstock. "Most people would have hit up a wedding site and been done in 10 minutes. Clara smiled faintly, eyes still on her work. "I'm not most people. And this wedding isn't about impressing a feed, it's about us." Rachel didn't reply right away. She reached into her tote and handed over her phone, screen glowing with an article headline. "Charleston's Rising Power Broker, Grayson Whitmore to host landmark 30th Gala." Beneath it, A photo of Grayson in a tailored suit, arms folded, grin too perfect. "They're calling it the event of the season," Rachel said. Clara handed the phone back without reading further. "Of course they are." An alert pinged on her own screen. A message from Mother, short and sharp. "We won't be attending. Priorities, Clara." Clara locked the screen and tucked the phone face down. Her hands didn't tremble, but they did pause. Rachel said nothing, just passed her another card and held out the glue stick like they were assembling war plans. "It's a nice way of saying, we'll be too busy posing for society pages to acknowledge your happiness," Rachel finally offered. "I got the translation," Clara said softly. After a long silence, Rachel pulled a small object from her coat pocket, a USB, worn and unlabeled. "What's that?" Rachel placed it gently beside the wine glass. "You remember that dinner? The one where Margot told Mrs. Hanley you were the practice child?" Clara blinked, stunned. "You recorded that?" Rachel shrugged. She was speaking in her "I forgot you were in the room" voice. "I figured someday you might want to hear what they really think when they're not looking at you." Clara stared at the little device. It felt radioactive. "Why now?" Rachel met her eyes. "Because you're about to marry someone who sees you, not as a footnote, not as a plan B. And you need to decide whether that's enough, or if you're still hoping for a different kind of family." Clara picked up the USB, turned it over in her hand once, then slid it into a drawer. "Thanks," she said, "but I already know the answer." Later that night, Nathan found her on the rooftop, now empty of paper and ribbon, wrapped in her oversized cardigan. He brought her tea, chamomile, no sugar, and sat beside her, shoulders touching. For a while, they didn't speak. Then, softly, "I saw your mom's message." Clara nodded. "Didn't need to open it. I could already hear the tone." He chuckled lightly. "Want to scream into the void?" "I've considered it," she said with a smile. "But I'd rather just make this day ours." "You sure you don't want a bigger venue?" he asked. "We could pivot. I could make some calls." Clara studied his face. There was something guarded in the way he said that, like a door closed too quickly. "Nathan," she said gently, "I don't care if we get married in a garden or a parking lot. As long as it's you at the altar." He turned his head toward her, eyes soft but unreadable. "That's why I'm marrying you." Rachel interrupted them just before midnight with a surprise visitor. "Julian?" Clara blinked. The man behind her best friend stepped into the lamplight, well-dressed, amused, familiar with Nathan in a way Clara had never quite seen from anyone else. Nathan stood, and they embraced briefly. "Didn't expect to see you this side of California," Nathan said. Julian raised an eyebrow. "And I didn't expect your wedding to be so small." Nathan guided him toward the stairwell, throwing a quick glance at Clara. "Give us a minute?" From the far end of the rooftop, their voices were hushed. Clara couldn't hear them, but Rachel leaned in closer. "He used to run PR for one of Nathan's old ventures." Clara turned to her, suspicious. "How old?" Rachel shrugged. "Old enough to be off the internet, which is saying something." Julian's voice floated back just enough for one phrase to carry. "Are you sure you don't want her to know who she's marrying?" Nathan answered so quietly, Clara barely caught it. "Not yet. She loves me for the man I am. That's everything." Later, as she sat back at the crafting table alone, Clara reached for the bouquet mock-up, a mess of silk flowers and ribbon loops. She tied a final knot around the stems, whispered into the petals, "This wedding may be small, but it'll be unforgettable." Charleston woke up to spring sun, headlines, and a flurry of black cars heading toward a tiny riverside chapel. The first light streamed through the tall, stained glass windows of the chapel, washing the wooden pews in hues of blue, amber, and crimson. Inside, the soft rustle of silk and whispers of anticipation filled the space. Clara stood in the bridal preparation room, her hands resting lightly on her waist, eyes closed as Rachel adjusted the final pin in her hair. Outside, however, serenity was cracking. Rachel darted to the window and lifted the edge of the lace curtain, her breath caught. What is it? Clara asked without turning. There's a lot of black cars, not museum people. These are tinted SUV types, and I just saw a satellite van. Clara opened her eyes slowly and met her own gaze in the mirror. Julian? Rachel was already pulling out her phone. I'll check. But if he tipped anyone off, I swear. Down the aisle, guests began arriving. Quiet murmurs and tapping heels against marble. Museum colleagues, a few prominent gallery donors, even an art critic from the Post and Courier took their seats, exchanging nods and curious glances as they noticed unfamiliar faces in designer suits filing in. Outside, Julian stood near the entry path, shaking hands with a woman in an earpiece. 3 minutes, he whispered into his phone. Yes, it's happening. Yes, they're here. Keep the lens tight. Let the chapel fill the frame. Nathan still hadn't arrived. Rachel returned to Clara, pressing her phone against her chest. They're calling this a soft leak. Local news just went live. Riverside mystery wedding drawing. VIPs across the country. You're trending. Clara turned to face her fully now. What do they think this is? Rachel hesitated. A tech magnate's secret wedding. Speculation is flying. Nathan's name is in 3 hashtags. But no photo confirmations yet. Clara took a breath and crossed to the window herself. The river glimmered beneath the rising sun. Across the lawn, security guards moved with earpieces, coordinating with near-silent gestures. Then, a silver Bentley rolled onto the gravel path. Margot stepped out first, dressed in powder blue silk, eyes sharp and scanning. Douglas followed, scowling at the press presence. Grayson was last, no tie, collar open, looking half asleep and wholly unprepared. One of the guards approached. We're the bride's family, Margot said crisply, brushing past. Apologies, ma'am. Guests with invitations only. Margot blinked. Excuse me? Grayson scoffed. What kind of wedding needs a guest list and bodyguards? Inside the chapel, Rachel was watching the live feed on mute. The camera had zoomed in just enough to catch Margot's confrontation, her face frozen in irritation. Clara, now fully dressed in her ivory gown, walked to the stained glass window and looked out. The morning light caught her veil and framed her like a painting. She watched silently as the Bentley door opened again. Nathan stepped out. The cameras fired instantly, bursts of light flashing against his charcoal tuxedo. His expression was calm but calculated. A small smile played on his lips as he nodded to the security detail. Rachel dropped her phone. That's Reyes Tech. He's the Reyes. Julian walked up behind Nathan, whispered something inaudible, and then guided him toward the chapel entrance. The press surged, but the guards held the line. Inside, the music began to swell. The prelude Clara had chosen herself. The small quartet played softly, but the sound was already drowned out by the buzzing media outside. Clara moved forward, each step deliberate. The moment felt suspended in amber. At the doors, her family stood frozen, staring at her like she was a stranger. She stopped just short, her voice steady, her posture regal. This is Nathan, and this is the wedding you skipped. Margot clutched her pearls as the security guard repeated, If your names aren't on the list, you'll have to step aside. The chapel doors loomed before them, ornate, old oak carved with vines and lilies. Just beyond them, the hum of violins and the hush of waiting guests promised a moment meant to be sacred. But outside, chaos flickered like a second heartbeat. Cameras whirred, phones recorded. Microphones were shoved closer. Margot turned to Douglas. Do something. Douglas straightened his lapels, ignoring the sweat collecting at his brow. I am Douglas Whitmore, he announced, as though the name itself were a key. This is my daughter's wedding. The guard didn't flinch. Then you should have been invited. Margot scoffed, taking a step forward. This is outrageous. We're not strangers. We're her family. From behind them, Grayson hissed. People are filming. Indeed, the lenses were locked on them, especially now that one of the photographers whispered loud enough for the crowd to hear. That's the bride's family, the ones who bailed for a birthday party. Douglas's jaw tightened. The press had connected the dots. Inside the chapel, the The soft hush of organ music flowed like water across the candlelit aisle. Rows of guests turned, murmuring as they recognized tech moguls, politicians, and gallery elites seated shoulder to shoulder. It was intimate, but powerful. This was no small wedding. Rachel stood near the entryway, headset in place, eyes sweeping every inch. She spotted the tension beyond the stained glass and headed for the threshold. Margot caught sight of her. "Rachel, thank God, let us through." Rachel smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, Grayson." "We want to sit near the front," Margot said quickly. "We're family." "Not today," Rachel replied. She turned, not waiting for argument. Julian leaned in to whisper, "She handled that better than most diplomats." Clara appeared moments later, veil lifted, eyes calm, face glowing beneath the candlelight. Her steps were deliberate, heels clicking against the polished stone. She stopped just before the doors. Her parents stared. So did Grayson. Their daughter, sister, looked nothing like the girl they'd dismissed. She looked like someone the world had taken note of, and they were late to notice. "I see you made it," Clara said, her tone even. Margot stepped forward. "Darling, this is all so much. We didn't expect—" Douglas added, "No one told us he was—" "Someone worthy," Clara offered. Margot winced. "Don't twist our words." "I'm not," Clara said gently. "I'm repeating the ones you never said aloud." Behind her, Nathan appeared, calm, crisp in an understated tux, nothing flashy, just enough to fit the gravity of the moment. His posture exuded confidence, not arrogance. Clara turned, took his hand, and faced her family fully. "I'm not just Nathan Reyes," he said clearly. "I'm the founder of Reyes Tech. And this," he looked at Clara with quiet reverence, "is the woman who saw the real me before anyone else even bothered to look." Grayson shifted uncomfortably. He was used to being the revelation in the room. For the first time, he wasn't. Margot's eyes darted between them and the cameras still rolling. "We didn't come here to fight," she said quickly, stepping toward Clara. "We came to support you." Clara held her ground. "You didn't just miss my wedding. You chose not to see me, and now the world sees what you never did." Margot's expression shattered, pain flashing, then pride, then something like shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but Clara was already turning away. Rachel waited with silent pride, bouquet in hand. Clara smiled softly, took her friend's arm. As the doors opened, Clara takes Rachel's arm to walk down the aisle. The crowd rises, flashbulbs explode. In the middle of champagne flutes and string quartets, 3 people sat silently in the back, whispered about, not greeted. The garden bloomed with pale tulips and blush-colored roses, sunlight dappling the cobblestone paths between candle-lit tables. White parasols offered shade to clusters of guests in linen suits and silk dresses. Laughter chimed across the lawn, mingling with the delicate strains of a live quartet. And in the far corner, almost hidden behind an ivy-laced column, sat Margot, Douglas, and Grayson Whitmore. The golden embroidery on Margot's gown looked absurdly formal compared to the effortless elegance around her. Douglas nursed his second glass of bourbon, staring into it as if it held answers. Grayson scrolled his phone, scrolling, swiping, pretending not to exist. No one approached. At the center of the celebration, Clara and Nathan stood radiant. Clara's dress had changed, now a sleek satin with soft sleeves and a backless cut that whispered grace without screaming for attention. Nathan was surrounded by venture capitalists, curators, and at least 2 senators, all eager to speak with him, yet it was Clara they gravitated toward when they wanted sincerity. Rachel lingered near the edge of the dance floor, glass in hand, observing everything. Her purse hung from her shoulder, weighted with a USB that would never see the light. Julian stepped up to the mic, his voice slicing through the hum of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he grinned, "I've done a lot of events. Startup launches, art galas, fundraisers with 5 commas on the line. But this might be my favorite." Laughter rippled. He continued, gesturing toward Clara and Nathan. "We're not just celebrating a wedding," he said. "We're celebrating vision, Clara's vision. The kind that saw Nathan before the headlines, before the boardrooms, before the tech exposés. When the world saw a technician, she saw a partner." There was applause, genuine and warm. Near the donation box for the Whitmore Reyes Arts Initiative, a small crowd had gathered to make pledges. Some left checks, others signed digital tablets. One man in a velvet blazer raised a glass and said, "This is the kind of love that rewrites narratives." Margot stood slowly. Douglas didn't move. Grayson just kept scrolling. She approached Clara with careful steps, hands clasped in front of her, like a student unsure of her lesson. Clara noticed her, didn't flinch. "We misjudged," Margot said, barely above the sound of the quartet. "We're sorry." Clara didn't look away. Her expression held no triumph, only a calm born of having no more to prove. "You misjudged who I was," she said softly, "but I didn't." Margot blinked. No response came. Behind them, the string quartet shifted into a gentle interlude as Clara took the mic herself. "For a long time," she said, "I thought love was about showing up for each other in the bright moments. Birthdays, holidays, job titles, but I've learned something better." The crowd leaned in. "Family," Clara continued, voice clear, "is not who attends the party. It's who doesn't walk away when things get quiet." Silence settled like dew. Then came the applause, low at first, then building, echoing off the stone walls of the villa. Julian wiped the corner of one eye dramatically. "She's going to make me cry, and I charge extra for that." Nathan slipped his arm around Clara's waist, kissed her temple. That was perfect. Later, when most guests had moved toward the dessert tables, Rachel approached quietly. Clara took the USB from her purse, handed it back without a word. "I never needed proof," she said. They brought the truth themselves. The two women shared a look, full of everything unsaid, and then parted. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden trails across the lawn, Grayson moved toward the Arts Initiative box. He looked around to be sure no one noticed. From his jacket, he pulled out a slim envelope, unsigned, and dropped it inside. Then he turned away, not even looking back. 1 year later, Clara stood at the center of her own exhibition, unapologetically herself. The Charleston Museum of Contemporary Arts shimmered under the soft glow of early evening lights. Glass panels caught the fading sunlight and scattered it across the marble floors inside. Guests moved through the main hall of the new exhibit, voices unseen, pausing before installations that pulsed with color, contrast, and stories that once went unnoticed. Clara's heels clicked softly as she stepped forward, the press of a small remote in her hand, dimming the overhead lights, just enough to draw all eyes toward the stage. She stood behind a simple podium, the museum's emblem carved discreetly into the wood. "Thank you," she began, voice clear and warm. "Tonight's not about me. It's about the artists who had something to say long before the world was willing to listen." Rachel stood to the side, hands clasped with quiet pride. Julian was nearby, nodding with approval and mentally drafting headlines. In the back row, Margot sat straight, her hair pinned into a neat twist. No sparkle, no flair, just presence. Douglas leaned forward slightly, listening. Grayson had no phone out. He wasn't scrolling, he was watching. Clara continued. "This exhibit isn't just about art, it's about rediscovery, rebuilding, reclaiming space that was once denied, and it's a privilege to share it with you." Applause echoed gently through the gallery, not explosive, but genuine. Later, as guests moved between canvases and multimedia displays, Grayson approached quietly. He didn't interrupt, just waited. When Clara finally turned, he offered a small envelope. "I'd like to support the foundation," he said, anonymously. No press, no nameplate. Clara took the envelope without breaking eye contact. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because it's important, and because I was wrong." She gave a small nod. "You were, but I appreciate the gesture." He didn't linger. As the crowd thinned, Clara slipped into her office briefly. There, atop her desk, rested a small note in familiar handwriting. "Margot's. No excuses, only hope. If you're willing, we'd like to meet you for brunch. Just us. No speeches, no cameras. There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. In the quiet garden behind the museum, Nathan found Clara standing near a stone bench, her hand resting gently on her belly. The moonlight filtered through the trees, painting them in silver. He walked up, wrapped an arm around her waist, and placed his hand where hers had been. They stood in silence for a moment before he spoke. "I never expected all this." Clara leaned into him. Neither did they, but here we are. Inside, the last of the guests filtered out. Rachel turned off the final light in the main exhibit room. On Clara's desk, a baby ultrasound lay nestled between two art catalogs, its curved form barely visible, but undeniable. As the museum lights dim, Clara whispers, "This time, they don't get to skip showing up." Though she was once overlooked, Clara no longer needed an invitation to be seen. Her quiet strength spoke louder than the headlines, louder than the whispers of the family who once turned their backs. Justice didn't storm in. It arrived with grace, on her terms, wrapped in truth too powerful to ignore. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, it may have come late, but it resonated where it mattered most. Sometimes the boldest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be.